Bob Baffert just entered a surprise second horse in the Preakness Stakes. Can he win? Stick around and find out. Hi, everyone. Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets. Here are the Preakness Stakes Spotlight Series on one of the top contenders, Goal Oriented, who was announced on Thursday afternoon by Bob Baffert that he would indeed run in the Preakness Stakes. Now, before we get to this news and this horse and talk about his chances, I want to remind you to press that like button and subscribe to NYRA Bets YouTube today. Subscribing is entirely free of cost, just notifies you when new videos drop on the channel, whether those are race previews, full card analyses, handicapping and betting tutorials, and so much more. All right, well, let's talk about goal-oriented for Bob Baffert. And this was a little bit of a surprise announcement on Thursday afternoon. Why, you say? Well, we knew Bob Baffert was already going to send Rodriguez to the Preakness Stakes, and goal-oriented had just run 2 weeks earlier. Well, I shouldn't say 2 weeks earlier. It will be by the time the Preakness comes around, but just ran on the Kentucky Derby Day undercard in an allowance optional claimer, won that race, but, didn't come back with a huge buyer speed figure in that effort in 91. And I think there are some legitimate questions about whether or not he's kind of at the cut to be able to compete at this level in the Preakness. So a little bit of a surprise move that he would run one of his intriguing 3-year-old prospects already into a Triple Crown race, but that was the decision that was made. Certainly shakes things up a little bit from a pace dynamic as well as a team dynamic. What do I mean by that? Well, Bob Baffert, when he enters a second horse, it's just not for no good reason at all. It's usually because maybe one of those horses kind of plays a little bit of a bodyguard for the other horse. So we'll talk a little bit about that with regards to goal-oriented and Rodriguez when we get into this. But listen, let's talk a little bit about this horse. As I mentioned, trained by Bob Baffert, likely to be jockeyed by Flavien Prat, who rode him the first 2 starts of his career, including last weekend at the Churchill Downs undercard for the Kentucky Derby. Sired by Not This Time, out of an Afleet Alex mare. By the way, justice for Afleet Alex. How do we not have an Afleet Alex stakes? Would somebody like to explain this to me, please? This is my soapbox that I'm on. And the horse wins 2 or 3 legs of the Triple Crown. We can't get a stakes named ready after Afleet Alex. Almost went down at the top of the stretch in the Preakness. Can't get a stakes named after Afleet Alex. We got a Maxfield stakes, but we don't have an Afleet Alex stakes. Truly baffling stuff. Anyway, I like seeing Afleet Alex up here, particularly for a Preakness horse, because that is one of my favorite Preaknesses to watch, is when Afleet Alex goes down to his knees at the top of the stretch because Scrappy T blew the turn and then goes on to just romp with Jeremy Rose aboard. What an incredible horse. Just one of my favorites. That was, one of my favorite horses when I was younger. So listen, let's talk about goal-oriented. He's only run 2 starts, and he won his maiden and debut, which was very impressive, going a little bit shorter, and we'll talk about that. Then stepped up on Saturday and won a $125,000 optional claimer. Now, he beat some nice horses in that race. He beat some horses that were on the Derby trail. He beat a horse like Hypnos for Kenny Big Peak, who was on the Derby trail. He beat a couple of others in that race that had been on the Derby trail, had run in some graded stakes races. Had been largely also rans in those races, but something, or at least on the trail, and proved to be the best of those. Went gate to wire. And like I said, earned a 91 buyer speed figure. He is a perfect 2 for 2. And as I mentioned, he last ran on the undercard. So he's going to be coming back on 2 weeks rest. Now, remember, last year, Seize the Gray ran the Pat Day Mile and came back on 2 weeks rest to win. We've seen plenty of Kentucky Derby winners run and then come back on 2 weeks rest to win the second leg of the Triple Crown. What is less common is to see a horse that is this young and ascending coming off 2 weeks rest to win. That is a little more uncommon. I mean, even if you think back to a horse like Mage, who was a pretty inexperienced horse who won the Kentucky Derby, came back and ran 3rd, if I'm not mistaken, in the Preakness. So it's not a common move that you see. And I think there's maybe some reasons to be skeptical about whether goal-oriented is really ready for this test. And I think it certainly makes you think a little bit about a horse like Cornucopian, who was dazzling in debut and at Oaklawn Park, looked so good. And they immediately stepped the horse up from that to the Arkansas Derby. And he just got cooked in the Arkansas Derby. I think he still ran a massive race in that Arkansas Derby to finish 4th, quite frankly, after setting the fractions he did. But But then he comes back and loses an allowance optional claimer at Aqueduct in a 3-horse field. And clearly that had taken something out of him. So you worry about maybe these horses being rushed a little too quickly into these big spots. But let's talk about goal-oriented in terms of what he brings to the table. And what you see is a couple of things that I think are positives. One is the debut going 6 with Juan Hernandez aboard. Gets a 91 buyer speed figure, faces older horses, and wins that race despite getting off to a slow start, despite being behind early, comes from well off the pace and wins going away. It was a very visually impressive effort, and it was backed up with a strong buyer speed figure of a 91 in debut. Then Bob ships him, along with several other horses from California, Churchill Downs, and points him towards this $125,000 optional claimer on the undercard of the Derby day. A couple of things happen here. One, he runs a mile and a 16th, so he stretches out to 2 turns. He deals with a sloppy track, and he deals with winners for the first time. Well, on a certain level, he passes all of those tests. He also shows a completely different running style, going straight to the lead and winning that race. Now, the margin of victory was getting eaten into by the end, and he ended up winning by less than a length. So it does make you wonder whether he wants more distance. Now, from a pedigree standpoint, not this time a Fleet Alex, you'd think the distance shouldn't be that major of an issue, or at least shouldn't be a red flag. And it might just be a matter of conditioning, that this horse just needs a couple more races, quite frankly, to just build up that conditioning and stamina to deal with going longer. Obviously, we'll be going a mile and 3/16 at the Preakness. And what you see, though, is a versatile running style. He's shown the ability to pass horses. He can come from off the pace. He's also shown the ability to go in the lead. Where is he at his best? We're not sure yet, because we've only seen these 2 efforts. So it does lead you to wonder what happens with him and Rodriguez. And a lot of it might depend on where they draw. But Rodriguez is clearly a need-the-lead horse for Baffert. Goal-oriented is not a need-the-lead horse. He won on the lead, but he doesn't need the lead. He could easily sit. Rodriguez can't sit. So it makes me think that Rodriguez is going to go to the front, and goal-oriented is going to try to flank him, basically, and run second. Anyone who's ever watched any amount of racing in Southern California knows exactly how Bob Baffert would like them to go into the first turn, which is goal-oriented, Rodriguez on the lead, on the rail, goal-oriented, drifting out a little wider to his outside off of his flank. If a horse like Clever Again wants to try to go, he's going to get pushed wide. Now, a lot of this has to do with where they draw, right? If Clever Again draws to the outside of goal-oriented and Rodriguez, forget about it. He's going to get drifted out into the 3 or 4 path going on that first turn. Goal-oriented is absolutely going to, I don't want to say run interference, but is absolutely going to make Clever Again's job a little bit more difficult. Because he's the only other main pace presence. River Thames is probably going to be tracking behind this group. So now, Clever Again draws to the inside. Well, then it's interesting, because now you would imagine Rodriguez really has to quarter horse it out of there to cross and clear a horse like Clever Again, who's really fast. And goal-oriented, again, might still try to run some interference somehow. But Baffert wants to go into that first turn 1-2, just as he did with Citizen Bull and Gaming in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, just as he's done in countless other races in California. And I don't say that as a criticism of Baffert. That's, as a trainer, that's what you just want to see. If you have 2 horses, one who needs the lead and one who can come from off the pace, you want them sitting 1-2 in a very comfortable trip. And that's what you're going to, if you're Bob Baffert, that's what you're hoping to get for in the Preakness Stakes at Pimlico. Whether that's possible, like I said, we'll see. But goal-oriented does have some versatility, and I think for that reason, he's a little bit interesting. But, and this is a big but, the 91 buyer speed figure is going to have to improve. Now, second time going long, it's reasonable to expect he could run a better race. He's also stepping up against much better horses, so that's a significant question that he's got to answer in some way. And I just worry about the Cornucopian example. That Cornucopian was a really good-looking horse and got rushed. And I just worry that goal-oriented might also be rushed in this regard and put into a spot where maybe he's a little bit above his head. and not quite able to get the job done. And hopefully it doesn't set the horse back, but he's going to have to improve at least 7 or 8 buyer points. And, probably 10, honestly. If you're, it's probably going to come back as a 101, a triple digit speed figure, which is something Rodriguez has shown the ability to do. Journalism has shown the ability to do. Clever Again has shown the ability to do. So, he's not even as fast as River Thames, who I said on the preview of that horse has to get faster. So Goal Oriented has to get faster, has to stretch out, has to face tougher competition. That's a lot to ask a young horse to do. He's got the talent to do it, and there's no two ways about it. He was a very, wealthy purchase, $425,000 purchase at the Keeneland September yearling sale, but ultimately is going to be a huge X factor in this race. And there's going to be a lot of speculation. He is going to become probably the most divisive horse in this race. You either are going to fade him or people are going to convince you that he is the most likely win candidate. And I can imagine that there's going to be very little in between on this. I am leaning towards fading in this particular spot because the reality is I just worry about this horse having to take on too many things in only his 3rd career start. Now, it's good to see that he handled a wet track. It's good to see he handled a dry track. It's great to see that he handled 6 furlongs and he stretched out to a mile and a 16. That's wonderful. He can rate. He can go to the lead. There's so much to like about this horse. In his next start, I just wish his next start wasn't the Preakness Stakes. He's going to be a little bit more of a price, though, because journalism, because Rodriguez, because even maybe River Thames and Gosker and Clever Again. But certainly the Baffert name holds a lot of sway at Pimlico. He's won this race 8 times. So putting anything past him seems pretty unlikely. And the betting public there is probably going to overbet a horse like Goal Oriented as opposed to leaving him at a fair price, which should be probably 8-1, 10-1. I could see this horse being 3rd choice 5-1 or something along those lines, which I just don't like at all. So listen, talented horse, adds a new dimension to the race, a little bit of an X factor. I think he ultimately is going to sit off of Rodriguez or try to sit off of Rodriguez. They're going to try to go into that first turn 1-2 and give Rodriguez a little bit of a cushion compared to everybody else, either float out, Clever Again out wide, or just leave a little bit of a buffer for journalism and River Thames and horses like that that'll be coming from off the pace. So never a dull moment when we're getting ready for the Preakness. And Bob Baffert doesn't just have 1 now, he's got 2. So going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out. Well, listen, folks, thanks so much for tuning into this preview of Goal Oriented for the Preakness Stakes. Make sure to press that like and subscribe button today. My name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and profitable day at the races, and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.